Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. Привіт for all you Ukrainians out there. Today we have a very special guest, Father Jim Nakonechny. Welcome to the program, Father Jim.
Good morning, everyone. Slava Isusu Christu, Slava Navike.
And Jim and I, we go back quite a number of years. We've known each other since university days here at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. And Jim has since gone on to become a Ukrainian Greek Catholic priest. And Jim, before we get into a little bit of your history, just to get everyone's attention, tell us, what is the most important spiritual place in Ukraine for us to visit?
Well, there are many important spiritual places to visit in Ukraine, but some of the highlights of the ones that I've been to is Western Ukraine is Zarovnitsa, which is kind of in Ternopil region. Yeah,
yes,
it's amazing. You drive through a little village, and all of a sudden there's this giant cathedral, and it's now declared a minor basilica of a place of pilgrimage of Western Ukraine for all the world to come. So it's pretty amazing. I was there last September and had an opportunity to celebrate the Sunday Divine Liturgy. And I thought, wow, here's me from Mandir celebrating in this giant cathedral in Ukraine. It was a pretty amazing experience. And I would encourage anybody, whether you're Ukrainian Catholic or Ukrainian Orthodox, to come and experience these various places across Ukraine.
That's an interesting point. I want to talk a little bit more about Zavarnitsa. Have we lost sound? Are you there, Jim?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. There's a siren going on outside, so they found me, I guess. But anyway, I want to come back to Zavarnitsa, but in terms of pilgrimage sites around the world, that's a great thing I also wanted to bring up. Ukraine isn't known as a pilgrimage site, but yet, Croatia or France or Guadeloupe, but there's so many pilgrimage sites around the world. And Ukraine isn't known for pilgrimage sites, but it should be. And I know you have mentioned several important pilgrimage sites in Ukraine. Tell us a bit about some of those.
Well, I often kind of think about how beautiful our country of Ukraine is, and how many of us, whether Catholic or Orthodox, especially Catholic pilgrims from around the world, are flocking to places like Lourdes and Fatima, Guadalupe, and Medjugorje in Croatia. But we have our own spiritual heritage and all these pilgrimage sites within Ukraine. And whether it's in Kiev at Pecherska Lavra, where in 1080s, this church is over 1,000 years old, and it's still standing today as a testament to faith. And no matter how many invaders attacked Ukraine, how many foreign powers have tried to rule over Ukraine, this grand cathedral is still standing. But across Ukraine, there's all kinds of small and larger pilgrimage areas. A lot of them are based on miraculous icons or apparition sites where the Blessed Mother had appeared to people, whether it was predicting or foretelling what's to come in the history of Ukraine, or helping to encourage and protect the people of Ukraine. So a couple of the places that I've been to that I think are really beautiful and unique sites in Western Ukraine are Hoshu, which is a Basilian monastery that's dated back to 1520, where a miraculous icon people had approached and were praying before the Mother of God, and they received healing. And whenever a healing takes place, other people hear about it. And then that brings more people. And now this whole complex that the Basilian Fathers have on the top of this mountain, or this big hill overlooking the village of Hoshu, is a place of daily pilgrimage that people come from all over. And it's amazing the beauty of the site, the beauty of nature, and how you can go to a place like this and just feel that connection with your spiritual self and realize that God is in our midst, that God is dwelling with our midst. And so often in our daily lives, we are so busy. So it's important for us to go on pilgrimages to be able to refocus ourselves, reunite ourselves with God, and put our priorities in proper perspective of what's important in our lives.
Now, and you're a Greek Catholic, Ukrainian Greek Catholic priest, and that's your faith. But in Ukraine, there are Ukrainian Orthodox, Greek Catholic, Polish Roman Catholic, and Russian Orthodox churches, and all of them are existing in the territory of Ukraine and controlling different sites. For you, it's not. It is or it is not important who's in control of a particular site. It's more about the historical and spiritual aspects of the place, right?
Very much so. If we call ourselves true Christians, we would know that Jesus wasn't Ukrainian Orthodox. He wasn't Ukrainian Catholic.
He wasn't.
He was a Jewish carpenter who gave up, died on the cross for our salvation and rose from the dead three days later from the tomb. And because of that, we all have salvation if we follow him. So when it comes to Ukraine, we have such a religious history, and a lot of it sometimes has been overshadowed by politics, whether it's the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church, Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. We've called each other names. I know I've been referred to as a uniate, which is often not a very nice term to use, just saying that we're in union with Rome. Well, what's wrong with being in union with Rome? We want to be part of the universal church. And even the Russian Orthodox Church, it's still God. So when we go to these different Christian pilgrimage sites in Ukraine, we're going for God. We're not going for the political entity. We're going to pray. We're going to seek a higher being. We're going to give thanks to God. And we're looking at our spiritual heritage. There's been division.
Yeah.
We have to find that unity through our prayer.
And beyond the spiritual side, you're very much a passionate Ukrainian. And so for the historical context of learning about what happened in the territory of Ukraine, you're very passionate about telling the world and making people from around the world know more about some of these specific sites like Hoashuv, which is a beautiful little location. And I think right next to it, there's a place called Hrushiv, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Hrushiv is actually within, not far from Drohobych, and it's within, an hour's drive of Hoashuv. And it's kind of neat that you can go on this little pilgrimage just, within an afternoon. You can see these major sites, but definitely when you go to visit Hoashuv, you will want to be there for at least a couple hours. Hrushiv, probably an hour would do because it's smaller, but it's a tiny village. But as you're driving up, there's these giant like life-size Station of the Cross in marble going up the hill to this little tiny golden dome church where an apparition took place in 1914 and then again in 1987. And the apparition was of the Blessed Mother of God, foreshadowing what was to come for the next 70 years of lack of faith, of the Soviet persecution of religion, but she was encouraging the faithful to keep on praying. There is hope in the future.
So she was predicting the communist regime.
She was predicting a dark area in Ukraine's history, which it definitely was. But if you go back further, 1640, there was a miraculous icon in the church where there was a cholera epidemic that was happening, and people were coming to pray. And a young girl had a dream. I believe it was a dream. I have to read the history again. But the Mother of God was telling her how to bring healing. And then there's a miraculous well. And the interesting thing about this site is whether it's a Greek Catholic or a Ukrainian Orthodox church, you have your altar in iconostas, and then you have a tetrapod or a little small altar in front of the altar where there's candles and a cross. In this church, instead of a tetrapod, there's a well in the center of the church where people draw holy water from, and you drink from it.
So they built the church around this well.
The church is built over the well.
Oh, fascinating.
So, and people draw from the water and they drink from that water, and that the holy water has had healing benefits through prayer of people that have visited. A lot of people come for the holy water and partake of it. And I remember when I was there was a story of a family that the grandmother had told her young grandson that, I know you're going out with your buddies on Friday night, but I know you're going to be going past Hrushiv. Stop and get me some holy water. So, young boys, young teenagers as they would be, they went out for a night on the town, and on their way back, he goes, I forgot to get Babcha her holy water. So he stopped on the side of the road and went along the ditch and filled a bottle with water and brought it back to Babcha. And she drank from it and she was healed. So the thing is, the story tells us that it's not only the holy water, but it's the prayers of the receiver. She believed if she had the holy water from Hrushiu, she would be healed. So even though he didn't bring her the holy water, her faith was what saved her, what gave her the healing. So it's the little stories like that that add to that spiritual and that ambiance of these places. And when I was there, just being inside this little church, you just feel so close and connected to God. And that's what traveling to Ukraine is all about, is being able to not only see the architectural beauty of this country, but also this deep spiritual heritage, which is connected to all of us that call ourselves Ukrainian in Canada. Because for me to be Ukrainian, you cannot be Ukrainian without that spiritual aspect, because our whole our feast day cycles, Christmas, Easter, all of our traditions, Pesenke, they're all kind of intergrained with faith. So it's important, to travel to Ukraine, to see where our people are from, to be able to see these beautiful places of spirituality that are so reasonable for us to visit. For us to go to places like Guadalupe or Lourdes or Medjugorje, those are a little bit more pricey because they're more developed countries. Ukraine is such a beautiful country, such a beautiful countryside, that when we go, and because of the exchange rates, it is very reasonable to go. I kind of feel guilty when I go, because you want to leave big tips to everybody, because you're thinking, I just ate a whole meal for $5 Canadian, and you kind of feel sorry, but the generosity and the hospitality of the people is so great.
Well, I don't want to get into the economics so much, but these trips that we've been doing to Ukraine over the years really are helpful to some of the small communities we visit, small villages we visit, and stuff like that. Jim, Father Jim, I know you're haven't been to Kiev, but Kiev has some beautiful historic sites that are very important and worth seeing too.
Correct.
The Pecheska Lavra monastery is currently controlled by the Russian Orthodox Church, but do you think it's still worthwhile visiting?
Absolutely. The Kiev Pecheska Lavra is, dating back from 1051, and then Saint Sophia's is from 1011. That these are the start of Christianity in Ukraine, whether they're in Kiev or Lviv or anywhere. But the roots of our faith are from Kiev and Rus, and to see these churches, it's pretty amazing. Kiev is known as the city of the Golden Domes because of the faith, and even though they're controlled currently by the Russian Orthodox Church, that's a fact that historically has happened to our people. We pray that one day that the Ukrainian nations and the Ukrainian people will be able to have control over these huge and important historical sites again. But just because we might have to pay an entry fee in order to enter these places, we're going there to see the spiritual heritage. And I think it'd be very important that, if as we start a tour, to start where the Christianity, where it all began in 988 with Saint Vladimir baptizing the people in Kiev and Rus, and starting there and then making our pilgrimage. The one thing that I always think is fascinating is, 1240, the Mongol horde invaded Kiev and sacked it. And often we hear that statement in history or in historical in books, but it didn't end there.
They sure didn't. They kept pushing west. Yeah.
And when you look at places like Pochayev in Western Ukraine, Zarvanetya in Western Ukraine, all of them have their start from monks fleeing Kiev in 1240. So we can see that basically the route sending out shoots across. And whenever, if you look at in the plant life or the plant kingdom, when a plant is dying, it starts to send out shoots in order to sustain itself, in order to hope for future generations. So that's exactly what's happened here. Is our faith was transplanted into all these other centers, and then you can say even from those centers, it's come to Australia, it's come to Brazil, Canada, North America, England, everywhere in the world, in the diaspora, wherever there's Ukrainians, there is a church.
So, Jim, I know you're passionate about architecture, And that may be, I don't know if that's always been something you've been interested in.
Mhm.
I know you spent several years working at the Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Village outside
Mhm.
of Edmonton, and you were involved in the restoration of some churches and some
Right.
historic buildings and stuff like that. Did that help you become more inspired about the architecture of churches in Ukraine?
I would say that was kind of the progression, but when I studied architecture in Winnipeg, my specialty was Byzantine church architecture. And of
Ah,
course,
okay.
somebody that's wanting to put their life and dedicate into building churches, you don't get many scholarships for. So, so I kind of went off on my own after that, and I kept on pursuing, church design, church architecture. I took courses in stained glass and iconography, and I wanted to know all facets of what it takes to build a beautiful church. So I've had the opportunity
Hmm.
over my short lifespan while I was in Ottawa to assist in the design of Christ the Savior Bukovinian Orthodox Church in Ottawa. I did the design for the interior and then
Oh, wow.
supervised it as it was painted. And then after I finished my studies at St. Paul University, I moved back to Edmonton and I was commissioned to paint the interior of St. Vladimir's Ukrainian Catholic Church in Red Deer. And 16 years later, I'm the current pastor of this church. So I look at this church and thinking, wow, could I do that now? I spent about 6 years of weekends on my knees painting the church. So it was a
That's a
beautiful thing to
quite
do.
the sacrifice and quite a journey. As much as we've known each other for many years, I didn't know that much about your academic journey into
Yeah,
the.
no, I've been studying churches and I've always had, I would say probably since I was probably maybe 15 years old, I started collecting pictures of Ukrainian churches of the world. And
Mm,
so one thing I really love is I can see a church and I can usually name it and know exactly where it was. And when you study so many churches, you can see the different styles of architecture and what influences. Even when you're looking at churches in North America, you can say, well, that church is from the Boyko region, or they took themes from
yeah,
Lemko, or from the Lemko region of Ukraine, and you can see a different style. And then even when you look
sure.
at the interior iconography of the churches, you can see influences from different styles from Ukraine. Like
And over time, there's been, depending on which priest or who's in control of that church at that time. Uh,
correct.
I know I want to draw attention to a little project that we have, which is the village of Tulova
Hmm.
in Western Ukraine on the River Prut, which is just outside of Snyatin,
Hmm.
on the border between Bukovina and Halichina,
Hmm.
historically. And that's my family's village, and they came to Canada a little bit before your family.
Hmm.
And in that village, there's one church, and it's shared between the Orthodox priest and the Ukrainian Catholic priest,
Hmm.
and they alternate mass times, and they share feast days and celebrations. Is that is that common? Is that something you've come across very often in Ukraine?
Not in North America. I see kind of less tension in Ukraine amongst faithful. Even when I speak with some of the seminarians that were from Ukraine, um, they're just people are just so happy to be in church. They're so
Mm,
happy to be praying that often the denomination, whether it's Orthodox or Greek Catholic, really didn't matter to them.
right.
That just the spirituality of the people is to be in a church to pray with in to God and to share in a common faith, because we both have a common heritage. We both have the same faith of Saint Volodymyr from 988, and we share in that tradition, and we should be proud of our heritage and where we're from. So that's why I often encourage people to go back. And even now in Ukraine, since 1991, when Ukraine declared its independence, we see such
Hmm.
a resurgence of faith across Ukraine. You're driving in the countryside or you're taking a train and you see new construction projects of churches in every little community. Even I visited one of my family villages of my mother's side in outside of Radechio by the village of Berestechko. It's a
Uh-huh.
village called Mykolaiv. And
Okay.
the church was built in 1861, St. Paraskevia, and a lot of people from that village actually built the church north of Smoky Lake called St. Paraskevia here in
Oh yeah.
Alberta. So there's that, the name, you know where the name is coming from, and even sometimes the style of the church. But when I looked at it, the church looks brand new. They've put gold. The domes are all covered with gold. The
Hmm.
outside is all reclad. And I asked them, where is all this money coming from? Because you guys have put so much time and effort into making your churches beautiful. And they said, we give little by little and we pay it.
Yeah.
But, just seeing some of the architecture, and I mentioned um, uh, earlier to you, Vince, that we were one of the churches in Khodary of Ukraine, of St. Vladimir and Olha,
Hmm.
has received a European Construction Award for its modern architecture and church design, which is really amazing that our churches in Ukraine, um, people would be amazed to see what modern church architecture looks like coming from North America, or especially the prairies here.
For
That
sure.
our
Speaking
architecture and history aren't static; they're dynamic.
right. So speaking of award-winning architecture, the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv has
Mhm.
also been winning some awards and has gained some international recognition for its work and whatnot. Did you get a chance to visit there?
Yes, I did. I took part last September in 2019
Hmm.
when Metropolitan Gudziak from Philadelphia came back to bless the mosaics of the dome. And I got
Oh,
an opportunity to celebrate Divine Liturgy with about 40 other clergy members. And it's a beautiful complex. Like coming there, it's modern. The church it's called the chapel, but for us in Canada, it would be a basilica. It'd be a cathedral
uh-huh,
because it's
uh-huh.
huge. It's got a lower church and an upper church, choir loft, and they're doing it all in mosaics, and it's beautiful. And it's the center of the campus, which is the heart of the university, and even the university complex around it. The architecture, the dormitories, the classrooms, everything is nicer than we'd actually see in North America.
Yeah, it's quite
They're really doing
modern.
excellent work out there. Everything down to tennis courts. They were blessed when I was there too.
They bless the tennis courts.
They blessed
That,
the brand new tennis
that
court.
that's where I need to play because I could use all the help I could get with
So,
tennis.
but it's nice to see that we have these world-class university facilities in Lviv that are educating our youth, and so we have a great future for a great future in Ukraine with very educated intellectual individuals that will be hopefully leading our country into more prosperity and freedoms to come.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. And I think the Ukrainian diaspora, the global Ukrainian community, whether it's Canada, England, Brazil, Argentina,
Hmm.
Australia, we are many. We
Hmm.
are huge. There are Ukrainians everywhere.
Yeah.
This, I more grew up with Ukrainian folk dance, and I know there's Ukrainian dance groups popping up in Los Angeles and
Yeah.
Miami and all over the world. There's Ukrainian dance groups.
And you don't
And
have to be Ukrainian to be involved in them.
you don't.
No.
You can be any color, religion,
Yeah.
belief, orientation. It doesn't matter. You can be in Ukrainian dance, and it's fascinating. And for me, that's exciting because it gets people excited about this place called
Hmm.
Ukraine, which is actually the largest country in Europe. And
Hmm.
people are really surprised to find out that it's the largest country in Europe. Yeah, it's bigger than Germany. It's bigger than
Yeah.
any other country that's fully in Europe.
Hmm.
So I really appreciate you encouraging everybody to check out these interesting and beautiful and historic spiritual destinations
Hmm.
as well. I want to ask you about speaking of church architecture. There's another village we like to visit in the Carpathian Mountains.
Hmm.
It's an old wooden Hutzal church in the village of Krivorivnya. Have you been to
I
Krivorivnya?
haven't. No.
It's a famous church because it's the church where the film Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors was filmed. And in this village, Hrushevsky and Lesya
Hmm.
Ukrainka and Ivan Franko, they used to come and spend time there healing and
Hmm.
writing and relaxing and stuff like this. And we take a lot of our groups to visit this church. And I was talking to Otets Ivan, who's the priest at the church, and he told me this story that the church originally was a Catholic church, a Greek Catholic church, and during the Soviet period, they were told either you become Orthodox or we're burning you down.
Hmm.
And is that a story you have heard much about the
That's
transformation?
practically the story of most of the Greek Catholic churches of Western Ukraine. Um,
Is it really?
yeah, it's either that or they closed them down. But during the Soviet period, many of our churches were ruined, demolished, and actually Ukrainian Orthodox churches as well, if they didn't write it over to the Russian Orthodox Church. And many of the churches that survived were used as libraries, granaries, storage facilities for military equipment. Uh, so which is a horrible and awful history for especially for the faith of the people of that village to see their that somebody cuts a hole in the dome and puts a grain auger and starts filling your church up with grain or sacks of grain and just said you're not allowed to pray in the church anymore. So I couldn't imagine what these people went through, but they still kept their faith. And as soon as the churches were free to celebrate again,
Mm-hmm.
they took over their churches again. And of course there's the political history of now is it was an Orthodox church, no, it was a Greek Catholic church, and going back to history and finding a way to appease everybody, without fighting. Because now we see now with the establishment of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Ukraine, there's fighting between Russian Orthodox and Ukrainian Orthodox. And the Ukrainian people rightly want to reclaim their faith, they want to reclaim their country, and they want to reclaim their churches. The Russian Orthodox Church has taken over many of our pilgrimage sites, many of our historic churches, but they are rightfully belong to Kiev and Rus, which is Ukraine today.
Yes.
So we would like to recover. We pray that many of our churches will come back, and many of our uh, pilgrimage sites, like Pochayev, was a Basilian monastery. And I think it's interesting because a lot of our faithful, we grew up, whether in Alberta or in New York, we have Basilian monasteries here in Canada, that we can have these roots of our monasteries here in Canada traced
Mm-hmm.
back to these same places in Ukraine, whether it's Krakow, Zolochiw, all these places that, Krakow is a famous pilgrimage site in Western Ukraine as well. And it's a Basilian monastery built kind of like a fortress. Another one is the monasteries of the Studite Fathers in Univ, Ukraine, Uspenska Monastery. And we have all these places of faith and pilgrimage that they have annual pilgrimages, and people can come there on their own spiritual pilgrimages on their own or with groups and stuff. So there's these little transplants that we have here in Canada all have their origin in Ukraine. And I had the fortune, great fortune. I spent probably, one of the reasons you never saw me for a few years was I was in the Basilian Fathers Monastery of St. Josephat in Glen Cove, New York for 2 years of my life, studying to be a Basilian monk and learning the history of the churches
Mm-hmm.
and and learning the history of Ukraine at the same time. And being part of the monastery, you learn about that monastic heritage of Ukraine. And whether you're Ukrainian Catholic or Ukrainian Orthodox, the monastic life of the church is basically the basis of our faith. Whether it was Pecharska Lavra, when you can go and see the crypts or the graves under
Mm-hmm.
and going down into the monastery of the caves and see where all these monks were buried. And it was those monks that continued, day and night prayer for Ukraine, for the faithful, that people would come and ask for their intercession and their prayers for help in their family. And that was part of daily life of whether you are intellectual or a peasant. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why these monasteries continue to survive. And now, especially since 1991, they're thriving. We're getting many new vocations of youth wanting to enter into spiritual life. There's also Redemptorist Fathers, also have, from Yorkton, Saskatchewan, that have also their roots in Ukraine as well, through there's
So
Roman Catholic,
many.
the Ukrainian Catholic Church. And right now, the Redemptorist Fathers of Lviv are taking care of the Ukrainian Catholic Church in Yorkton, Saskatchewan, as well as Newark, New Jersey. So we see that we keep on,
Everything's interconnected.
yeah, we're still interconnected, and the church continues to send out those shoots to bring new life. I know in my parish, I'm really blessed to have so many recent immigrants. They've come for work to Canada, trying to find a better life. But the
Yes.
first thing they look is for their church, a place where they can come together as a community, a place that they can pray, and a place that they can hear and practice their own language and their own spirituality, which is very important. And I know as our as the generations go by, sometimes we lose the language, but that spirituality is still so important. And we have, we're blessed, especially in Edmonton, with all these Ukrainian schools and opportunities to do exchange programs. I know the University of Saskatchewan
Absolutely.
has an exchange program with Chirunchi, and being able to have that continual dialogue and exchange with our motherland. So, when we're looking at, wanting to know the fullness of our spiritual life, by not wanting in your lifetime to go and travel to Ukraine and see the roots of your spiritual life, whether it's starting in Kiev and I know our pilgrimage was hopefully going to, in the future, will go from from the start, 988, all the way to modern times. And as we
Absolutely.
travel across from Kiev to Western Ukraine, to see Pachayev, to see Univ, to see Zarvanitya, to see St. George's in Lviv. And the other thing that I'm always fascinated by is the architecture.
Hmm.
Starting early, we go from Baroque, Kozatsky Baroque, or
Right.
we could take it even one step further. If you look at the earlier examples of Saint Sophia, it was Greek architecture because it was transplanted
Yes.
from Constantinople. And then as churches were rebuilt or remodeled, then we have the Kozatsky Baroque style, which we see in many of our Ukrainian Orthodox churches in Canada here. They imitate
Hmm.
that Kozatsky Baroque on their churches here, whether it's St. John's here or the Metropolitan Cathedral of Holy Trinity in Winnipeg,
Hmm.
or any of the churches here. And then we go to Western Canada, and Western Ukraine, and we see more of the influence of the Austrian and European styles of Baroque,
Absolutely.
Renaissance, and it's still Ukrainian church architecture, but it's in a new form. And that shows that the church is a dynamic, and architecture is not something that's built and forgotten. We continue to evolve. We try to improve. Sometimes we don't do that well. We kind of go back and look for the older styles and try to go forward. That's why we see in Canada, Western Canada, in North America, a lot of churches looking, if we want to build a wood church. When you think of a wooden church, what's the first example? You think of a Hutzel church, that wooden style, the
Right.
overhangs of the roof line. Wonderful example is St. Elias in Brampton, Ontario, that burned down a few years ago, and they rebuilt it again. And it's kind of in a Boyko style of a church that was destroyed, and now we have this monument of wooden architecture here in Canada. But to go back
Very
and see
interesting.
all these beautiful wooden churches, the historic ones, I remember probably about 10 years ago, I had a chance to go to the area around Peremyśl in Poland side, but it was a Ukrainian city, and see many of these village churches, Ukrainian Catholic village churches that are now World Heritage sites,
Oh,
and they're
yeah.
the practicing churches, active parishes, and they're 450, 500 years old, and they're wood.
Yes,
And
that's a
we're,
beautiful area. We actually take groups, and a lot of people are looking for their ancestral heritage
Mhm.
in that area as well. Father Jim, I think we could talk all day about all the interesting places to see in Ukraine, but we're out of time. And I want to say thank you, and дуже щиро вам дякую. And I really look forward to going back to Ukraine with you sometime in the near future when it's safe to travel.
Mhm.
And I know we had talked about creating a pilgrimage trip with you. And I think if anyone wants to join along, they got a sample just now of how much information there is to be learned about the history and the culture and the spirituality of Ukraine. So thank
Well,
you so much for joining
you're
us.
welcome. Дуже дякую, що дали мені нагоду. And I look forward that hopefully in the near future we'll be back to health and be able to travel and be able to lead a tour to Ukraine to see the beauty and of our faith and heritage.
So if anyone has any questions for Father Jim, you can make them in the comments of this video, and then either Father Jim or someone from our team will try and get the answers to you and get back to you. And otherwise, have a wonderful day. Father Jim, one more time, thank you so much for joining us. It was a real pleasure. And take care, everybody. Have a nice week.
Thank you, Spoham.